They say time heals, but they are wrong. Time only sharpens the blade of truth, clutching wilting lilies. I watched an 18-wheeler back into my driveway. My father-in-law was ordering men to toss my dead daughter's belongings onto the grass like trash to make room for his new grandchild. He thinks grief has made me weak. But he is mistaken. Today, I did not come home to cry. I came home to light the fuse. My name is Nadia Redford, and until this morning, I believed that standing over the grave of my 5-year-old daughter was the absolute limit of human suffering. I was wrong. The drive back from the cemetery felt endless, a blur of gray asphalt and the metallic taste of tears that refused to stop falling. It had been exactly 365 days since Lily left us, and 6 months since Ethan followed her into the dark, leaving me the sole survivor of a shipwrecked life. The leather steering wheel was hot under my palms, scorching my skin, but I hardly felt it. I was numb, encased in a shell of grief so thick I thought nothing could penetrate it. But as I turned the corner onto the long, winding driveway that led to my home, the coastal Victorian villa I had bought with my own bonuses from Apex Strategics, not a single dime of sterling money involved. The numbness shattered. A massive 18-wheeler was parked diagonally across my front lawn, its engine idling with a low, guttural rumble that shook the hydrangeas I had planted with Ethan. The side of the truck bore the bold, aggressive logo in navy and gold sterling movers. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching against the gravel. For a second, my brain refused to process the visual data. I thought perhaps I was hallucinating from exhaustion, but then the back ramp of the truck slammed down with a deafening clang, and I saw them. Men in blue uniforms were marching out of my front door, their arms laden with boxes. Not just any boxes. They were carrying soft, pastel-colored bins. One of them was dragging a small, white canopy bed frame. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. That was Lily's bed. I threw the car door open and scrambled out, nearly tripping over the hem of my black morning dress. The salt air, usually so calming, choked me with the scent of diesel fumes. "Stop," I screamed, my voice tearing through the humid afternoon air. "What are you doing? Put that down." The movers hesitated, glancing toward the porch. Standing there, clad in an Italian suit that cost more than most people earned in 6 months, was my father-in-law, Atticus Sterling. He looked like a king surveying a conquered kingdom, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, a cigar unlit in his left hand. He didn't even blink at my screaming. He simply gestured with 2 fingers for the men to continue. "Keep moving," he barked, his voice gravelly and authoritative. "We do not have all day. I want that upper floor cleared within the hour." Cleared. I ran up the stone steps, breathless, my vision spotting with red rage. "Atticus, get out of my way. Tell them to stop. That is Lily's room. You have no right." Atticus turned to me slowly, his eyes devoid of any warmth. To him, I had never been the grieving widow of his son. I was merely an inconvenient asset that needed to be managed. He looked at his watch, a gold Rolex that glinted in the harsh sun. "Nadia," he said, saying my name as if it were a distasteful word on his tongue. "You are hysterical. I expected as much, considering the date, but business does not stop for sentimentality." "Business," I choked out, pointing a trembling finger at the lawn where a worker had just tossed a bag of Lily's stuffed animals onto the grass. One of them, a raggedy pink rabbit she had slept with every night, tumbled out and landed face down in the dirt. "That is not business. That is my daughter's life. You are throwing her away like trash." "We are making space," Atticus said smoothly, stepping in front of the door to block my path. "The past is dead. Nadia, you are clinging to a museum of morbidity. It is unhealthy, and frankly, it is a waste of prime square footage." "It is my house," I hissed, stepping closer, invading his personal space. "Mine. My name is on the deed. Mine alone. Get your goons off my property before I call the police." Atticus chuckled, a low, dry sound. Oh, calm down. We are simply preparing for the future. Preston and Chantel need a place to stay while their new estate is being renovated. It will take 6 or 8 months, maybe a year. They cannot stay in a hotel. It looks bad for the family image. My stomach turned. Preston, Ethan's younger brother, a leech who had never worked an honest day in his life, and Chantel. No, I said, my voice shaking. Absolutely not. Preston is not setting foot in here, and you are definitely not putting them in Lily's room. That is her sanctuary. I have not touched a single thing in there for a year. Exactly. A high-pitched, grating voice cut in from the hallway. And it smells like old dust and depression. It is terrible for the baby's vibes. Chantel stepped out onto the porch, wearing a tight white dress that emphasized the curve of her pregnancy. She was barely 3 months along. Yet she walked with an exaggerated waddle, one hand resting protectively over her stomach. She looked around the yard, her nose wrinkled in distaste. Atticus, darling, she whined, ignoring me completely. I told you, the lavender paint has to go. It is so lower middle class. We need something neutral, cream or eggshell, and these windows, they need UV protection films. I cannot have the heir to the Sterling Empire getting sun damage in the nursery. The heir. The word hung in the air like toxic smoke. They were erasing Lily, my sweet, brilliant, gone-too-soon Lily, to make room for the child of a woman who had been dating Preston for fewer than 12 weeks before getting pregnant. You are not turning my dead daughter's room into a nursery for her, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I tried to push past Atticus, but he caught my arm. His grip was surprisingly strong, painful. You will do what is best for this family, Atticus snarled, his mask of civility slipping for a fraction of a second. Preston is my son. This child is my grandson, the first male heir in a generation. Do you think I care about your shrines? You failed. Nadia, you gave us a sickly girl who died. Chantel is giving us a future. The cruelty of his words slapped me harder than any physical blow. I gasped, tears springing to my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I yanked my arm free and ran toward the movers. One of them, a burly man with a thick beard, was carrying a small, delicate object, Lily's porcelain music box. It was a vintage piece, hand-painted, that played Claire de Lune. It was the last thing Ethan had bought for her before she got sick. Give that to me, I shrieked. Lunging for the box, the mover looked startled. Lady, please, I am just doing my job. I said give it to me. I grabbed the edge of the box. He instinctively pulled back, not wanting to drop it, but the sudden motion made it slip from his sweaty gloves. Time seemed to slow down. I watched in horror as the music box tumbled through the air. It hit the pavement with a sickening clatter. The lid flew open. The tiny porcelain ballerina inside spun wildly on her spring. Bent at an unnatural angle, the melody began to play, tinny and distorted. Claire de Lune, echoing hauntingly over the sound of the idling truck. It didn't shatter, but the sound of it hitting the ground broke something inside me. I dropped to my knees, scooping up the box, checking for cracks. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it. For heaven's sake, Nadia! A weary voice sighed. I looked up to see Beatrice, my mother-in-law, standing in the doorway behind Chantel. She looked pale, her gray cashmere cardigan pulled tight around her thin frame. She didn't look at me. She looked at a spot on the floor near my feet. Beatrice, I pleaded, clutching the music box to my chest. Tell him this is insane. This is Lily's room. You loved her. You cannot let them do this. Beatrice sighed again, adjusting her pearl necklace. Nadia, dear, please be reasonable. You have been rattling around in this big house all alone for a year. It is morbid. Preston needs the space. The baby is coming. We have to think about the living. Think about the future of the Sterling line. Lily is well. She is at peace now. She does not need the room. She is my daughter. I screamed, the betrayal cutting deeper than Atticus's cruelty. Beatrice had always been passive, but I never thought she would be complicit in erasing her own granddaughter. She was a Sterling, Atticus corrected coldly, stepping down the stairs to tower over me where I knelt. And Sterlings do not dwell on failures. Now, stand up. You are making a scene in front of the staff. It is undignified. I stood up, my knees scraping against the stone. I clutched the music box so tight the edges dug into my skin. I want you all out. Now. I am calling my lawyer. Atticus laughed. It was a genuine, amused sound. He reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a folded document. Your lawyer, he asked mockingly. You mean that ambulance chaser you hired to handle Ethan's probate save your money? Nadia, you do not have much of it left. I have plenty, I spat. I bought this house. I pay the bills. Do you? Atticus unfolded the paper. You might want to check the records. Ethan took out a second mortgage on this property 2 years ago, a very significant one, to fund that little architectural firm of his that never made a dime. And guess who holds that note? The bank sold the debt last week to a private holding company. He leaned in close, his cologne expensive tobacco and old leather filling my nose. I own the debt, Nadia, $3 million, and according to the terms, if the primary resident, that is you, engages in behavior detrimental to the property value or refuses reasonable family accommodation, the note can be called in immediately. I can foreclose on you by tomorrow morning. I can have the sheriff throw you and your boxes of toys out onto the street in 24 hours. I stared at him, my blood running cold. That is a lie. Ethan would never... But the doubt crept in. Ethan had been secretive towards the end. He had been stressed. Had he signed something, or had Atticus forged it? It didn't matter. Not right now. Atticus had the paperwork, and he had the power. Be smart, Nadia, Atticus said, his voice dropping to a patronizing purr. We are family. We take care of our own. Preston and Chantel will take the upper floor. You will keep the master suite. You will help Chantel with the pregnancy. You will be a good sister-in-law. And in exchange, you get to keep living in your pretty little house. Refuse, and I will destroy you. He turned his back on me, dismissing me as if the conversation was over. Put the crib in the corner where the window is, he shouted to the movers, and get those ugly curtains down. I stood there, alone in the driveway. The sun was beating down, but I felt freezing cold. I looked at Chantel, who was smirking as she directed a mover to take down Lily's nameplate from the door. I looked at Beatrice, who turned away to avoid my gaze. I looked at Atticus, the architect of my misery. They thought they had won. They thought I was broken, a widow, a grieving mother, a woman alone. I looked down at the music box in my hands. The ballerina was bent, but she was still standing. Slowly, I took a step back, then another. I lowered my head, hiding my eyes behind my hair. To them, it looked like defeat. It looked like submission. Fine, I whispered, loud enough for them to hear. Good girl, Atticus said without turning around. I walked toward the side entrance, away from them. I didn't go to Lily's room. I couldn't bear to watch them rape her memory. I went straight to the master bedroom and locked the door. My hands were still shaking, but not from fear anymore. I placed the music box gently on the vanity table. I looked at myself in the mirror. My mascara was running. My eyes were red. My face was pale, but underneath the devastation, something new was igniting. Atticus was right about one thing. The past was dead. The Nadia who cried and begged was dead. I wiped the black tear tracks from my cheeks. They wanted a war. They wanted to take my home, my memories, my dignity. I stared at my reflection, and for the first time in a year, the sorrow in my eyes hardened into something sharp, something lethal. Welcome home, Preston, I whispered to the empty room. Welcome home, Chantel. I walked over to the window and watched them through the blinds. They were invading my territory, thinking they were the predators. They had no idea they had just locked themselves in a cage with a wounded beast. I was not going to leave. I was going to stay, and I was going to burn them all down. one by one. The heavy oak door of the master bedroom clicked shut, and I turned the brass lock with a trembling hand. The sound was a sharp, metallic finality that separated me from the invasion happening downstairs. The muffled thuds of heavy boots and the scraping of furniture being dragged across hardwood floors vibrated through the soles of my feet. But in here, the air was still. I walked over to the bay window, my legs feeling like they were filled with lead, and sank onto the velvet chaise lounge, in my hands. I still clutched the porcelain music box. The tiny ballerina was bent at the waist. Her painted tutu chipped where it had struck the pavement. I wound the key on the bottom. Hoping against hope, the mechanism whirred, a sickly grinding noise, and played a few disjointed notes of Clair de Lune before seizing up completely. Silence returned, heavier than before. I placed the broken toy on the nightstand and closed my eyes, letting the ghost of the music pull me backward. This room, this house, it was never meant to be a battlefield. It was supposed to be our fortress. Atticus liked to tell people that he had given us this house. He loved the narrative of the benevolent patriarch bestowing gifts upon his children, but the truth was etched in the bank records I kept in a fireproof safe at my office. I bought this house, me, Nadia Redford. I was 28 years old when I made senior financial advisor at Apex Strategics. I had taken the inheritance my grandmother left me, a modest sum she had saved over 50 years of teaching piano, and combined it with every cent of my quarterly bonuses. I remembered the day we signed the deed. It was a rainy Tuesday in November, 7 years ago. Ethan had sat beside me at the closing table, his hand warm over mine. He was not like them. Ethan was an architect who saw lines and light where his father saw only profit margins and zoning loopholes. He had soft hands, the hands of an artist, usually stained with graphite or charcoal. "Are you sure about this, Nady?" he had whispered, using the nickname only he was allowed to use. "We could let Dad help with the down payment." "No," I had said, signing my name with a flourish. "If we take his money, we take his rules. This is ours. We pay the mortgage. We own the walls." We had put down $400,000 in cash. It was everything I had, and for 6 years, I paid the monthly mortgage of $8,500 like clockwork. The idea that Atticus held a note on this property was ludicrous. A mathematical impossibility unless forgery was involved, but sitting there in the dim light, I realized that for men like Atticus Sterling, truth was just another asset to be liquidated when convenient. The house was big, too big for just 2 people, but we had filled it with dreams. And then, we filled it with Lily. My breath hitched at the thought of her name, Lily. She was the only thing the Sterlings could not buy, and the only thing they could not save. When she was diagnosed with the blood disorder at 3 years old, Atticus had simply asked how much it would cost to fix it. As if she were a defective building foundation, he did not understand that some things were beyond the reach of his checkbook. For 2 years, our lives shrank to the size of a hospital room. Ethan and I took turns sleeping in the uncomfortable recliner next to her bed, reading stories about brave rabbits and moonlit adventures. When we finally brought her home for hospice, that room upstairs, the room Chantel had just called gloomy, became our entire universe. I had painted the walls that soft lavender myself, because Lily said it reminded her of the sunset. We glued glow-in-the-dark stars to the ceiling, 300 of them, so she would never be afraid of the dark. The day she took her last breath, the sun was streaming through those windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. She had looked at me, her eyes bright and feverish, and whispered that she was ready to go to the stars. That was exactly 1 year ago today. I kept the room exactly as she left it, the indented pillow, the half-finished coloring book on the desk, the smell of her strawberry shampoo that still lingered on the sheets. It was not morbidity, as Beatrice claimed. It was preservation. It was the only way I could keep the memory of her physical presence from fading into the ether. And then, 6 months later, the second wave crashed over me. It was a Tuesday, just like the day we bought the house. The police officer who knocked on my door looked too young to be delivering news that would end my world. Hydroplaning, he had said. A slick road, a sharp turn, a guardrail that failed. Ethan died instantly, at the funeral. Atticus did not cry. He spent the entire service checking his BlackBerry, annoyed that the market was down 2%. Beatrice wept. But her tears felt performative, a necessary accessory to her black veil. They buried Ethan in the Sterling family plot, next to ancestors he barely knew, miles away from the spot I had chosen for Lily. They took him in death just as they had tried to take him in life. The Sterlings had always hated me, I knew that. To them, I was the daughter of a schoolteacher and a mechanic. I was new money, earned through labor rather than lineage. They hated that I worked. They hated that I refused to change my last name to Sterling until Lily was born. And even then, I kept Redford as my professional identity. They hated that when Atticus tried to bully Ethan into joining the family real estate conglomerate. I was the one who stood by Ethan's side and told Atticus to go to hell. I was the wall Ethan could lean on. And now that the wall was standing alone, they wanted to bulldoze it. I stood up and walked to the door. Listening, I could hear Preston's voice booming from the foyer. "Man, look at these ceilings. We can fit the 80-inch flat screen right there above the fireplace. Chantel, babe, tell the movers to be careful with the sneaker collection. Those Jordans are worth more than this car." Preston, Ethan's younger brother by 4 years. If Ethan was the artist, Preston was the caricature. He was 32 years old and had never held a job for longer than 6 months. He was a professional son, living off an allowance that Atticus dispensed like treats to a trained dog. I knew for a fact that Preston was drowning in gambling debt. Ethan had bailed him out twice, $50,000 each time, swearing me to secrecy. Preston resented Ethan not because Ethan was successful, but because Ethan was good. Preston had always looked at me with a mixture of lust and disdain, angry that the help had married the golden boy. And then there was Chantel. I had met her only 3 times before today. She was 24, a fading influencer whose engagement metrics were dropping faster than her neckline. She had latched onto Preston 5 months ago at a club in Miami. It was a symbiotic relationship. She needed money to maintain the lifestyle her followers expected, and Preston needed a trophy to distract from his failures. The pregnancy was their ace in the hole. A miracle, they called it. I called it insurance. Chantel knew exactly what she was doing. She knew Atticus was desperate for a legacy, especially after Ethan died. A grandson would secure her position in the will and guarantee Preston's allowance for the next 18 years. They were not moving in here because they needed a place to renovate their estate. There was no estate. I had run a credit check on Preston just last week. Out of curiosity, his credit score was in the low 500s. They were broke. I paced the length of the room, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with terrifying clarity. This was not a temporary stay. This was an occupation. Atticus mentioning the mortgage was the key. He claimed he bought the debt. If that were true, he had been planning this for months. He waited for the 1-year anniversary of Lily's death, knowing I would be at my weakest, emotionally shattered and vulnerable. He brought the moving trucks while I was at the cemetery to maximize the psychological shock. He wanted me to snap. He wanted me to be the hysterical woman, so he could justify taking control. Why? Because the house was worth $4 million in the current market, but more than that, it was the only thing left of Ethan that Atticus did not own. It was a symbol of Ethan's defiance, and Atticus Sterling did not tolerate defiance, even from the grave. I looked at the wedding photo on the wall. Ethan was looking at me, not the camera, his eyes full of that quiet, steady love that had anchored me for 10 years. "I am sorry, Ethan," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I promised to be nice to your family. I promised to keep the peace, but peace was a luxury for the living, and I felt very dead inside." I walked over to my closet and pulled out a shoebox from the top shelf. Inside, underneath a stack of old birthday cards, was a small velvet pouch. I opened it and poured the contents into my hand. It was a spare key to the safety deposit box at the downtown branch of First National Bank. Atticus thought I was just a grief-stricken widow. He forgot that before I was a widow, I was a shark in the financial world. I knew how to follow money. I knew how to spot a bad deal. And I knew that when a man like Atticus Sterling made a move this aggressive, it was because he was hiding something. He claimed to hold a $3 million mortgage on my home, a mortgage I never signed, a mortgage Ethan never told me about. If Atticus had forged Ethan's signature, he had made a fatal error. Ethan had a tell. When he was stressed, his handwriting changed. The loops in his G's and Y's became tighter, almost jagged. Atticus would not know that. He would have copied a signature from a birthday card or a casual check. I clenched the key in my fist until the metal bit into my palm. Downstairs, I heard glass shattering, followed by Preston's raucous laughter. They were opening Ethan's wine collection, the vintage bottles we had saved for anniversaries we would never have. Let them drink, I thought, a cold calm settling over me like a shroud. Let them celebrate their victory. Let them think they have conquered the castle. They had no idea that they were not the new owners. They were just evidence. I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. I looked at the woman in the mirror. She looked tired. She looked pale. But the fire was back in her eyes. It was a cold, blue flame, burning on the fuel of absolute hatred. I would play their game. I would let them think I was beaten. I would let them sleep in my house and eat my food. And while they slept, I would dig. I would find the paper trail. I would find the cracks in their perfect golden facade. I dried my face with a plush towel and walked back into the bedroom. I picked up the broken music box one last time. "Rest now, Lily," I whispered into the silence. "Mommy has work to do." I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. The screen glowed to life, illuminating the darkness of the room. I opened a new browser window and typed in the search bar. I did not search for a lawyer. Not yet. I searched for DNA testing kits priority shipping. Then I opened a second tab and searched for Private Investigators Boston Financial Fraud. The cursor blinked. Waiting for my command, I began to type, my fingers moving across the keyboard with the precision of a pianist playing a requiem. The tears were gone. The grief was packed away in a box in my mind, right next to the memories of a life that no longer existed. Atticus wanted a war. He was going to get a massacre. But first, I needed to know exactly what kind of monster I was dealing with. And I had a feeling that the baby in Chantel's belly was the first loose thread that would unravel the entire tapestry of lies. I hit enter. The game had begun. It took exactly 7 days for the parasites to fully attach themselves to the host. In biology, a parasite requires a living organism to thrive, draining its energy and resources while offering nothing but disease in return. In my home, the process was identical, though much louder and significantly more expensive. The silence that had once defined my life, a silence I had curated to honor the memories of Ethan and Lily, was murdered by the thumping bass of bad pop music and the shrill complaints of a woman who thought culture was something you bought in a bottle at a duty-free shop. I stood in the center of my living room, clutching my briefcase, staring at the wall where a moody, abstract oil painting of the Boston Harbor used to hang. Ethan had bought it for our 5th anniversary from a local artist in the South End. It was gone. In its place hung a massive, gold-painted mirror with Baroque flourishes that looked like it had been stolen from the lobby of a failing casino in Atlantic City. "Do not look so sour, Nadia," Chantel chirped, walking past me with a bowl of popcorn. She was wearing a silk robe that was open just enough to be inappropriate, her fake baby bump leading the way. "That old painting was depressing, all those grays and blues. This mirror opens up the space. It makes the room look rich. Feng shui. You know." "Where's the painting, Chantel?" I asked, my voice dangerously level. "Oh, I had the movers put it in the garage," she said, popping a kernel into her mouth. "Somewhere in the back. Do not worry. It is safe next to those old boxes of books." She breezed into the kitchen. leaving a trail of cheap perfume that smelled like vanilla and desperation. I closed my eyes and counted to 10. They were erasing us. Layer by layer. They were peeling away the skin of this house and grafting their own tacky, superficial identity onto its bones. Preston was no better. If Chantel was the decorator from hell, Preston was the security threat. 2 nights ago, I had come home early from Apex Strategics. I had expected to find them watching television or drinking, but the house was quiet, too quiet. I walked softly down the hallway to my home office, the one room besides the master bedroom I had explicitly forbidden them from entering. The door was ajar. I pushed it open to find Preston hunched over my filing cabinet. He had forced the lock with a letter opener. Papers were strewn across the floor, tax returns, utility bills, old invoices. He was sweating, his eyes darting frantically through a folder labeled Assets, looking for something. "Preston," I had asked, leaning against the doorframe. He jumped nearly a foot in the air, spinning around so fast he knocked over a cup of pens. "Nadia." "Jesus, you scared me," he stammered, his face flushing a deep, guilty crimson. "I was just looking for a stapler. Chantel needs to organize her receipts for the baby shower planning. The stapler is on the desk," I said, pointing to the object sitting in plain sight. "The deed to the house, however, is in a safety deposit box at First National Bank, along with the original insurance policies and Ethan's will." Preston's face fell. The mask of the bumbling brother-in-law slipped, revealing the greedy scavenger underneath. "I do not know what you are talking about," he muttered, shoving the papers back into the drawer messily. "You are paranoid. Nadia, Dad is right about you. Get out," I said. "And if you touch my files again, I will report you for attempted identity theft." He had scurried away like a cockroach exposed to sudden light, but the incident confirmed what I already knew. They were hunting. Atticus had sent them here as his advance team, tasked with finding the legal loopholes that would allow him to seize the property without a messy court battle. But the psychological warfare was worse than the snooping. By Friday, the house had transformed into a nightclub for the unemployed and wealthy. Preston and Chantel invited their circle, a group of loud, vapid social climbers who treated my home like an Airbnb they had no intention of cleaning. I came down for a glass of water at 11 o'clock at night to find 20 people in my kitchen. Smoke filled the air, despite my strict no-smoking rule. A man with bleached hair was sitting on my granite counter, wearing his shoes. But what stopped my heart was the bottle sitting on the island. It was a 1995 Chateau Margaux. Ethan had saved that bottle. We were going to drink it on the day Lily graduated from high school. It was a promise bottled in glass, a future that never happened. Now, it was empty, lying on its side next to a pile of lime wedges and half-eaten tacos. "Who opened this?" I asked, my voice trembling not with tears, but with a rage so hot it felt like lava in my throat. Preston looked up from a game of cards he was playing at the dining table. "Relax, Nadia. We ran out of the cheap stuff. It is just wine. I will buy you another one." "You cannot buy another one," I whispered. "That was Ethan's." "Ethan is dead," Preston said. Slapping a card down on the table, the room went silent for a second. Then the laughter resumed, nervous but dismissive. "He does not need wine anymore. Stop being such a drag. Have a drink. Might loosen you up." I looked at the empty bottle. I wanted to grab it by the neck and smash it over Preston's head. I wanted to scream until the windows shattered, but I did not. I knew that was what they wanted. They wanted the breakdown. They wanted the show. I turned around and walked back upstairs, the sound of their laughter following me like a pack of hyenas. The next morning, Beatrice arrived. My mother-in-law did not bring movers or loud music. She brought Tupperware and poison wrapped in concern. She let herself in with the key Atticus had undoubtedly copied without my permission. And by 10 o'clock, she was in the kitchen, cleaning up the mess her son had made. "Oh, Nadia," she sighed when I walked in, wearing my suit for work. She was scrubbing a wine stain out of the rug with vigorous, angry motions. Look at you. You look dreadful. Are you eating? You look so thin. I am fine. Beatrice, I said, pouring coffee. I have a big meeting today. Work, work, work. She clucked her tongue. Atticus is so worried about you. We all are. You know, grief can manifest in strange ways. Paranoia, hoarding, obsessive behavior. Preston tells me you are locking doors and hiding mail. Is that true? I am protecting my privacy, I said. It sounds like a breakdown, dear, Beatrice said, standing up and wiping her hands on a towel. She walked over and touched my cheek with a cold, damp hand. Maybe it is time to take a break from that job. It is too much stress. You are not thinking clearly. We could find a nice facility for a few weeks, somewhere quiet, just to get your head straight. The trap was so obvious it was insulting. Declare me incompetent. Get power of attorney. Sign over the house. My head is perfectly straight. Beatrice, I said, stepping back from her touch. And I have to go to work. Please make sure Preston cleans up the patio. He left beer cans out there. He is under so much pressure with the baby coming, Beatrice snapped, her voice suddenly sharp. You should be more understanding. Family helps family, but you have always been so selfish. I left before I said something that would give them ammunition. 2 days later, the legal assault began. A man named Silas Thorne arrived at my door at 7 o'clock in the evening. He was Atticus's personal attorney. A man with a smile like a shark and a suit that cost more than my car. He sat in my living room, placing a leather portfolio on the coffee table right on top of a coaster. Careful not to damage the wood, which was a level of respect he did not extend to me. Atticus wants to resolve this amicably, Thorne said, sliding a thick document toward me. He is willing to set up a family trust. You transfer the deed of the house into the trust. In exchange, you get a life estate. You can live here rent-free for, let us see, 5 years. After that, the property reverts to the Sterling estate for the benefit of the grandchild. I flipped through the pages. It was a massacre on paper. 5 years, I asked. And in exchange for giving him a $4 million asset, he forgives the mortgage he claims to hold, the fake mortgage. The debt is real, Mrs. Redford, Thorne said smoothly, and this is a generous offer. If we go to court, we will bring up your medical history, the depression after your daughter's death, the erratic behavior reported by your family members. We will paint a picture of a woman unable to manage her affairs. The judge will likely grant conservatorship to your next of kin. That would be the Sterlings. I have no next of kin, I said, closing the folder. And this house is not for sale, not for a trust, not for a penny. Tell Atticus that if he wants this house, he will have to bulldoze it with me inside. Thorne's smile vanished. That is an unwise position. Get out of my house, I said. The retaliation was swift. The next morning, I woke up to a freezing house. The thermostat was dead. I went to the bathroom to brush my teeth, and the faucet sputtered dry. No water, no heat. I called the utility companies. I am sorry, ma'am, the customer service representative said. We received a request to suspend service for major renovations. The request came from the owner, Mr. Atticus Sterling. He is not the owner, I shouted into the phone, losing my composure for the first time in days. But it was useless. The account had been flagged. It would take 48 hours to sort out the clerical error. I had to shower at the gym. When I got to Apex Strategics, I could feel the eyes of my colleagues on me. The whispers stopped as soon as I entered the break room. Is everything okay? Nadia, my boss. David, asked me later that afternoon. He looked uncomfortable. I got a call today. An anonymous tip. Someone claimed you are under investigation for embezzling client funds. Obviously, I know it is ridiculous, but with the compliance board, even a rumor triggers an audit. Atticus, he was not just attacking my home, he was attacking my livelihood. He knew that without my job, I could not pay the legal fees to fight him. He was trying to suffocate me from all sides. I stayed at the office that night. I could not go back to that freezing house, to the noise of Preston's video games and Chantel's complaints about the draft. I sat in my corner office on the 35th floor. Looking out at the Boston skyline, the city was a sea of lights. Cold and indifferent, I had never felt more alone. But as the clock ticked past 9 o'clock, then 10 o'clock, the despair began to harden into something useful. Atticus was arrogant. He was using brute force because he thought I was weak. He thought he could scare me into submission with cold showers and audits. But he had made a mistake. He had pushed me into a corner where I had nothing left to lose. I pulled a fresh legal pad toward me. They were parasites. Beatrice, Preston, Chantel. They fed on lies and money that wasn't theirs, and Atticus was the host that enabled them. I needed to cut off the food supply. I thought about the DNA test I had ordered. It should arrive tomorrow. That was the first dagger. But I needed more. I needed to know why Atticus was so desperate for my house. It wasn't just spite. A man like him doesn't spend this much energy on petty revenge. He needed the asset. Why was he liquidating? Was the great Sterling Empire not as solid as it looked? I logged into my terminal. As a senior financial advisor, I had access to market data that the general public did not see. I began to pull the credit default swap rates for Sterling Construction. I looked at their leverage ratios, and there, buried in the subtext of a quarterly report from 3 months ago, I saw a flicker of a shadow, a liquidity crunch, a massive loan coming due in 2 weeks. My heart began to race. He didn't just want the house for the baby. He needed the house as collateral. He was over-leveraged. If he didn't secure new assets to back his loans, the banks would call in his debts. I smiled, a cold, humorless expression in the reflection of my monitor. "You are broke, aren't you? You old bastard," I whispered. I did not have proof yet, not enough to go to the FBI, but I had a scent. I picked up my pen and wrote down 3 names on the legal pad: Chantel, Jax, the baby. Then I wrote 3 more words: follow the money. I would not go home tonight. I would sleep on the couch in my office. Let them have the house for 1 more night. Let them drink the wine. Let them think they had won. Because while they were partying on the deck of the Titanic, I was the one steering the iceberg. I needed evidence. Hard, undeniable, irrevocable evidence. Words were wind. I needed photographs. I needed recordings. I needed the truth written in blood and ink. Tomorrow, I would hire the investigator. Tomorrow, the hunt would truly begin. I turned off the overhead light, leaving only the glow of the screen. My face illuminated in the blue light of vengeance. The silence of the office at 2 o'clock in the morning was heavy, but it was not empty. It was filled with the ghost of a conversation I had tried to forget. I sat in the glow of my monitor, rubbing my temples, when the memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. It was from 2 weeks before the accident. Ethan had been frantic, pacing our living room, his face pale and drawn. I had thought it was just the stress of a deadline. He had grabbed my shoulders, his grip tight, almost desperate. "Nadia," he had said, his eyes wide and terrifyingly lucid. "If anything happens, if the foundation cracks, you look at the final design. The Harbor Point sketches, the ones I refused to sign." At the time, I thought he was speaking metaphorically about his relationship with his father. But sitting here now, with the knowledge that Atticus was financially drowning, I realized Ethan had been giving me a map. I did not go home. Instead, I drove to the outskirts of South Boston, to a climate-controlled self-storage facility where Ethan kept his archive. He never trusted his father's office with his true work. He called this place his sanctuary of rejected ideas. The unit was cold and smelled of ozone and aged paper. I flipped the switch, the fluorescent light flickering to life with a low buzz. Rows of cardboard tubes lined the metal shelves, organized by year and project name. My heart hammered against my ribs as I scanned the labels: the Seaport Lofts, the Fenway renovation, and there, tucked in the back corner, covered in a thin layer of dust, was a black plastic tube labeled Harbor Point, Phase 4. I pulled it down. It was heavy. I uncapped the end and slid out the large, rolled sheets of vellum. I spread them out on the concrete floor. They were architectural drawings for a luxury waterfront complex, intricate and beautiful, bearing Ethan's unmistakable style. But as I smoothed out the corners, I noticed something odd about the bottom of the tube. It was too shallow. I reached inside, my fingers probing the plastic base. It was loose. I pulled hard, and the false bottom popped out. Tucked into the hollow space was not paper, but a silver USB drive taped to a handwritten note. The note was just 3 words. For Nadia. Insurance. My hands shook as I pocketed the drive. I did not dare review it there. I drove back to my office, the city blurring past me like a bad dream. I knew I couldn't plug this into my work network. Apex Strategics had firewalls that flagged encrypted devices. Instead, I used an old air-gapped laptop I kept in my safe for sensitive client data. I booted it up and inserted the drive. A password prompt appeared. I typed a Lily, access denied. I typed Ethan, access denied. I closed my eyes, thinking of the one thing Ethan loved as much as us, the one place he felt free. I typed Ozymandias, the name of the poem he used to quote when he talked about his father's empire. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. The screen flashed green. Folders appeared. I spent the next 3 hours staring into the abyss of the Sterling family soul. The first folder was labeled The Wash. It contained hundreds of scanned invoices and bank transfer records. I was a financial advisor. I knew what money laundering looked like. And this was textbook. Atticus was using his construction projects to clean dirty money for an outfit called the Syndicate. He was inflating material costs by 300%, paying ghost contractors for work that was never done, and funneling the clean cash back into offshore accounts. Ethan had found out. The emails in the folder proved it. He had confronted his father. I opened the second folder, labeled The Confrontation. It was an audio file. I put on my headphones, my breath catching in my throat, as Ethan's voice filled my ears. It sounded tinny, recorded secretly on a phone in a pocket. You cannot do this, Dad, Ethan's voice said. He sounded young, scared. This is federal prison. This is blood money. You are a naive child, Atticus's voice boomed, clear and arrogant. This is how empires are built. You think the steel pays for itself? You think the zoning permits are free? I did this for you, for the legacy. I do not want it, Ethan shouted. I am going to the DA. I am done. If you walk out that door, Atticus lowered his voice to a lethal whisper, you will lose everything, and accidents happen. Ethan, roads are slippery, brakes fail. I ripped the headphones off, gasping for air. The room spun. Atticus had threatened him. Specifically, brakes fail. The police report said Ethan had been speeding. They said he lost control. But here was his own father, weeks prior, outlining the method of his death. I felt a scream building in my chest, a primal howl of grief and rage. But I swallowed it down. This recording proved Atticus was a monster. And it proved he was a criminal fraudster. But it was circumstantial regarding the murder. A good defense attorney like that snake Silas Thorne would argue it was just a heated argument, hyperbole between father and son. Accidents happen is a common phrase. It was not a confession. I needed something that would destroy him completely. Something that would strip him of the one thing he cared about more than money, his lineage. I clicked on the final folder. It was simply labeled Preston. Inside were scanned medical records from 22 years ago. I zoomed in on the date. Preston was 12 years old. The report was from a private clinic in Switzerland. Diagnosis orchitis, secondary to severe parotitis. I quickly opened a browser on my phone and searched the medical terms. Mumps, a severe case of mumps in a post-pubescent or pubescent male. I read further down the document. The prognosis was stark. Written in the cold. Clinical German of the Swiss doctor, with an English translation attached. Complete testicular atrophy, azoospermia, irreversible infertility. My hand flew to my mouth. Preston was sterile. He had been sterile since he was a child. There was a second document, a bank transfer of $50,000 from Atticus to the clinic, with a note, record expungement and confidentiality agreement. Atticus knew. He had paid to hide his son's shame, to protect the image of the virile, sterling men. I sat back in my chair, the pieces of the puzzle falling into a picture so grotesque it made me laugh adry. Hacking sound. Atticus was destroying my life, desecrating Lily's room, and betting his entire financial survival on the birth of a grandson. He was leveraging the sterling name on the promise of an heir, but Preston could not have children, which meant the baby growing inside Chantel, the prince of the sterling empire. The reason they had thrown my daughter's toys on the lawn was not a sterling. It was a fraud. Preston had to know. He was the one with the medical condition. He knew he was shooting blanks, so why was he playing along? I remembered the conversation in the kitchen. Preston's desperation for money, his gambling debts. He was so terrified of being cut off that he was willing to claim another man's child just to keep his place at the trough. He was letting his father believe the lie because it was the only value he had left to offer. And Chantel. She was just a grifter who had found the perfect mark. I looked at the clock. It was 5 a.m. The sun was beginning to bleed gray light over the harbor. I had the gun. Now I needed the bullet. I picked up my phone and dialed the number of the private investigator I had researched the night before. His name was Russo. He was expensive, discreet, and specialized in infidelity. He answered on the second ring, his voice gravelly with sleep. "Russo," he grunted. "Mr. Russo," I said, my voice steady and cold as the steel of the USB drive in my hand. "My name is Nadia Redford. I have a job for you. I need you to find a biological father. I usually find the guy who is cheating, not the guy who got the girl pregnant," Russo said. "In this case, they are the same mystery," I said. "I need you to look into a woman named Chantel Vance. She is currently living in my house. She is 4 months pregnant. I want to know who she was sleeping with 4 months ago. I want names. I want dates. And I want DNA samples if you can get them." "That is going to cost you," Russo said. "Priority work is double." "I will pay you triple," I said. "But I need it fast, and I need it watertight." "Consider it done," he said. I hung up and looked at the screen one last time. Atticus thought he held the mortgage on my house. He thought he owned me. But I held the mortgage on his soul. I had the proof of his financial crimes. And soon, I would have the proof that his dynasty was a lie. I ejected the USB drive and hung it around my neck on a silver chain, tucking it under my silk blouse. It felt warm against my skin. "Hang on. Ethan," I whispered to the empty office. "I am going to finish what you started." I stood up, smoothed my skirt, and prepared to go home. I had to walk back into that house, look Preston in the eye, and smile at Chantel's growing belly. I had to play the part of the defeated widow for just a little longer. Because when I finally dropped the curtain, I wanted to make sure they had nowhere left to run. The manila envelope slid across the scratched formica table of the diner with a dry hiss. Russo, my private investigator, looked like he had slept in his car, which he probably had. He took a long drag of his coffee, his eyes bloodshot but alert. "You were right," Russo said, his voice a low rumble that barely carried over the clatter of silverware and the morning rush. "She is not just getting yoga lessons." I opened the envelope. The photographs were grainy but unmistakable. They showed Chantel Vance entering a boutique gym in the Back Bay called the Iron Temple. It was the kind of place where memberships cost $500 a month and the mirrors were adjusted to make you look thinner. In the subsequent shots, she was not working out. She was in the parking lot, locked in a passionate embrace with a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite and coated in bronzer. "His name is Jax Miller," Russo said, tapping a photo of the man. "Personal trainer, aspiring actor, 3 arrests for petty theft, and 1 for possession of anabolic steroids. He has been training your sister-in-law 3 times a week for the past 4 months. And by training, I mean they spend 20 minutes on the treadmill and 40 minutes in his Jeep." I stared at the image of Jax's hand resting familiarly on Chantel's pregnant stomach. It was possessive. It was intimate. It was the smoking gun. Does he know, I asked, looking up at Russo, that she is playing house with the sterling heir? Oh yeah, I got audio. Russo pulled a small digital recorder from his pocket. He pressed play. The recording was filled with the ambient noise of a busy street, but the voices were clear. You have to be patient, babe, Chantel's voice whined. Once the old man kicks the bucket, Preston gets half the empire. Then I divorce the loser, take my settlement, and we are set for life. I am tired of waiting. A deep, impatient voice replied. That had to be Jack's. And I do not like another man playing daddy to my kid. That is my blood in there. Chantel. It is our ticket, Jax. Just shut up and keep your mouth shut. Do you want to be a trainer forever? Or do you want to drive a Ferrari? I signaled Russo to stop the tape. A cold smile touched my lips. Perfect. There is more, Russo said, leaning in closer. While I was tailing her, she made another stop. Not the gym. She went to a construction site in the seaport. The sheer glass tower going up next to the Sterling project. I frowned. That is Kavanaugh Development, Atticus's biggest rival. Exactly. She met with Silas Kavanaugh himself. It looked tense. She handed him a flash drive. He handed her an envelope. Thick, cash thick. My mind raced. Chantel was not just a gold digger. She was a corporate spy. She was playing all sides. She was likely feeding Kavanaugh confidential information about Atticus's bids or project delays information she was stealing from Preston, who was too stupid to realize he was being used. She is blackmailing Kavanaugh, I realized aloud. Or selling him secrets. Either way, she is a liability to everyone. I did my job, Russo said, leaning back. You have the guy. You have the motive. You want me to confront her? No, I said, sliding a check for $5,000 across the table. I want you to disappear for now, but keep your phone on. I'm going to need you for the finale. I left the diner and drove straight to an electronics store. I bought 4 high-definition, motion-activated spy cameras. They were small, disguised as smoke detector batteries and USB wall chargers. When I got home, the house was empty. Preston and Chantel were out shopping for baby clothes with Beatrice's credit card. I moved quickly. I installed 1 camera in the living room, focused on the main seating area, 1 in the kitchen, 1 in the hallway outside their bedroom, and the last one I placed in my own home office, angled at the door. I synced the feeds to a secure cloud server accessible only from my phone. By the time they returned, carrying bags of designer onesies, the trap was set. That night, the digital eyes in the walls paid for themselves. I was in my bedroom, watching the feed on my iPad. It was 2:00 in the morning. Preston was alone in the living room, stumbling drunk. He was holding a glass of my whiskey, and talking to Chantel, who was sitting on the sofa, scrolling through her phone. Dad is breathing down my neck, Preston slurred, pacing the rug. He wants to see the ultrasound again. He keeps talking about the sterling chin. It is making me sick. Drink more. Then, Chantel said without looking up, it helps. What if he finds out? Preston asked, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper. He stopped pacing and looked at her. What if he finds out I am broken that I cannot know? He will not find out, Chantel snapped, finally looking at him, because you are going to sign the birth certificate, and the world is going to see a sterling baby, and you are going to get your inheritance. Who cares if the kid is not yours? It is a biological prop. Preston, we need it to unlock the vault. You want to be poor. You want to go back to dodging loan sharks. No, Preston whimpered. I just hate him. I hate Jax. Jax is useful, Chantel said cold-heartedly. You are useful. As long as you both play your parts, we all get paid. Now shut up and go to bed. I hit the record button, saving the clip to 3 different hard drives. Preston knows. The realization was a hammer blow. He was not a victim of paternity fraud. He was a co-conspirator. He was so desperate for his father's money that he was willing to legitimize another man's child to secure his payout. He was defrauding his own father. but the next morning brought a threat that overshadowed the domestic drama. I was at my office at Apex Strategics when an alert popped up on my private terminal. I had set a monitor on the property title of my house, Alert Lien Pending, Applicant Zurich Global Holdings. I opened the file. Atticus had moved. He had submitted the forged transfer agreement, the one he claimed I signed, transferring the house to the trust, and was using the property as collateral for a massive bridge loan. The amount was $12 million. He was desperate. The hole in his company's finances must be deeper than I thought. He needed $12 million immediately to cover the missing funds before the auditors arrived at the end of the month. If that loan went through, my house would be encumbered by a debt I never authorized. If Sterling Construction collapsed, the bank would foreclose on my home to recoup their loss. I grabbed my coat and ran. I met Marcus at his office in a glass building downtown. Marcus had been my friend since our days at Wharton. He was a shark in a three-piece suit, specializing in high-stakes property litigation. I laid everything out on his desk: the recording of Ethan, the medical records, the photos of Jax, the video of Preston's confession, and the alert about the loan. Marcus listened in silence, his expression growing more serious with each piece of evidence. "This is extremely serious. Nadia," Marcus said, leaning back in his chair, "we're looking at fraud, forgery, paternity deception, embezzlement, and likely conspiracy. Atticus could be facing severe legal consequences. Preston as well. I want to stop the loan." I said, "I want to file an injunction. If we file an injunction now," Marcus warned, "Atticus will realize we're on to him. He'll hire top lawyers. He may try to destroy evidence. He'll argue that Preston's recording is inadmissible or fabricated. He'll say the medical records were obtained unlawfully. So what do? We let the situation unfold," Marcus said, his eyes sharp. "Let the loan paperwork move forward until it reaches the final signature stage. The bank requires a wet signature from the primary resident. That is, you witnessed by a notary for a loan of this size, even with the trust transfer. He is going to try to forge that too, or he's going to try to trick you into signing it." "He is trying to push me out," I said. "He wants me to sign a quitclaim deed." "Then give him what he wants," Marcus said. "Or at least, make him think you are giving it to him. We need to get everyone in one room. Atticus, Preston, Chantel, the notary, and ideally, his business partners. We need him to commit the crime in public." A plan began to form in my mind. It was dangerous. It required me to walk into the lion's den and bare my throat, but it was the only way to get a clean kill. I went back to the house that evening. The atmosphere was tense. Atticus was there, sitting in my living room like he owned the place, smoking a cigar. "Nadia," he said as I walked in, "we need to settle this. My lawyers are drafting the final transfer papers. I am tired of your stalling." I dropped my bag on the floor. I let my shoulders slump. I made sure my eyes looked red and defeated. "I am tired too, Atticus," I whispered. He paused, the cigar halfway to his mouth. "Excuse me. I cannot do this anymore," I said, my voice cracking. "I cannot live in this house with the noise, with the memories. You win. I will sign the papers. I will transfer the house to the trust. Just give me enough money to buy a small condo in the city, and let me leave." Atticus's eyes lit up with a predatory gleam. He exchanged a look with Preston, who was lurking in the kitchen. "A wise decision," Atticus said, standing up and buttoning his jacket. "I knew you would see reason eventually. We will draw up the severance package, $100,000, generous, considering the circumstances." It was an insult. The house was worth $4 million. But I nodded. "Fine," I said. "Just get it over with." "We will do it properly," Atticus announced, his ego expanding to fill the room. "We need to celebrate. This house is coming back to the family, and the heir is coming. We should combine the occasions." "What do you mean?" I asked, feigning confusion. "A party," Atticus declared. "Next Saturday. Here, we will announce the gender of the baby. We will announce the acquisition of the property for the trust, and we will sign the papers in front of the board of directors. A show of strength. It will reassure the investors. It was perfect. He was inviting the audience for his own execution. A party, I repeated dully. Here with all your friends. Yes, Atticus said. You will be a gracious hostess one last time. You will stand on stage, sign the transfer, and welcome the new generation. Then you can pack your bags and go. I looked at him. I looked at Preston, who was grinning like a fool. I looked at Chantel, who was smirking at her phone, probably texting Jax. Okay, I said softly. I will do it. Next Saturday. Atticus clapped his hands. Excellent. I will handle the catering. You just make sure the place is clean. He left. Sweeping out the door with the arrogance of a Caesar, Preston and Chantel followed him out to the driveway to say goodbye. Leaving me alone in the hallway, I walked over to the mirror, the ugly gold one Chantel had hung up. I looked at my reflection. The defeated widow was gone. The woman staring back was a predator who had just lured the prey into the trap. I pulled my phone out and texted Marcus. It is on. Saturday night. Get the papers ready. Then I texted Russo. Saturday, 7 o'clock. Bring the guest. And finally, I sent one last text. This one was to a number I had found in Chantel's phone records, the private number of Silas Kavanaugh, Atticus's rival and the man Chantel was blackmailing, Mr. Kavanaugh. If you want to see Atticus Sterling fall and get your money back from the girl who is squeezing you, come to 42 Ocean Drive this Saturday. I have a front row seat for you. I put the phone away. The stage was set. The players were cast. I went upstairs to Lily's room. I sat on the edge of the bed. In the dark. 1 more week, baby, I whispered. Just 1 more week, and then the monsters go away forever. Downstairs. I heard the front door open. Preston and Chantel were back, laughing. Did you see her face? Preston cackled. She totally folded. We are getting the house. I told you she was weak. Chantel said, Now, help me order the balloons. Atticus wants gold and silver. I listened to them plan their celebration. I listened to them divide up the spoils of a war they did not even know they were losing. Saturday was going to be spectacular. The transformation of my home into a stage for the Sterling family's victory lap was grotesque in its efficiency. For 3 days, a battalion of florists, caterers, and event planners descended upon the house, stripping away the last vestiges of its quiet dignity and replacing it with the loud, gold-leafed vulgarity that Atticus mistook for class. I played my part to perfection. I was the ghost in the machine, the silent, nodding widow who had finally been broken by the weight of reality. I woke up at 6 o'clock in the morning to let the florists in. I helped Beatrice polish the silver that she claimed was a family heirloom, even though I knew she had bought it at an estate sale in Connecticut 5 years ago. I am so glad you are finally being sensible, Nadia, Beatrice said on Thursday afternoon. We were in the dining room, arranging white hydrangeas into towering crystal vases. She paused to pat my hand, her skin dry and smelling of expensive hand cream. Atticus was worried he would have to use the legal route. Nobody wants that. It is so messy. This is much better. We are a family after all. And once you move into that nice little condo, you will see, a smaller space is much easier to manage for a single woman. You are right. Beatrice, I said, cutting the stem of a flower with a sharp snap of the shears. I was holding on to the past. It is time to move on. Exactly, she beamed, oblivious to the fact that the shears in my hand were pointed just inches from her wrist. And do try to look a bit more alive for the party. Atticus has invited the governor and the press. We want to show them that the Sterling family is united. No long faces. I will be the picture of joy, I promised. The house began to fill with the smell of roasting lamb and truffle oil, masking the scent of the sea that I loved so much. Atticus had spared no expense. He was not just celebrating a new grandson or a property acquisition. He was trying to project strength. He needed the world to believe that Sterling Construction was solvent, powerful, and expanding. He was careless. Arrogance always makes men careless. On Friday afternoon, 24 hours before the party, Atticus set up a temporary command center in the living room. He was barking orders into his phone, pacing back and forth on the Persian rug, his voice booming. "I do not care what the union rep says," he shouted. "Tell him if he strikes, I will replace the whole crew with non-union labor by Monday morning. And get the senator on the line. I want him to cut the ribbon on the Seaport project next month." He sat down on the sofa, opening his silver MacBook Pro to check an email. Then, his other phone rang. He glanced at the screen, cursed, and stood up, walking out to the terrace to take the call, leaving the laptop open and unlocked on the coffee table. The room was empty. The caterers were in the kitchen. Preston and Chantel were upstairs napping. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I had been waiting for this moment. I walked casually toward the table, pulling a high-speed flash drive from the pocket of my cardigan. I sat down, my movements fluid and practiced. I plugged the drive into the side of the laptop. A window popped up. I did not look for emails this time. I looked for the books. Atticus kept a shadow ledger. Every corrupt businessman does. They need to know where the real money is, even if they show the IRS a fiction. I found a folder labeled simply personal, do not touch. I dragged the folder to my drive. The progress bar appeared. 20% Nadia. Chantel's voice screeched from the top of the stairs. I froze. My hand hovered over the laptop. I did not look up. I could hear her footsteps descending. "Nadia, where is the steamer? My dress looks like a rag." 50%. "I think Beatrice put it in the laundry room," I called out, keeping my voice steady, though my palms were sweating. "Check the bottom shelf." "Ugh, you are useless," she grumbled. I heard her turn and walk toward the back of the house. 80% Atticus was walking back from the terrace. I could see his shadow stretching across the floorboards. 99% complete. I yanked the drive out, closed the folder window, and stood up just as Atticus stepped through the French doors. "What are you doing?" he asked, his eyes narrowing suspiciously. I picked up a stack of cocktail napkins from the table. "Just tidying up. Atticus, you left a ring of scotch on the wood." I wiped the table near his computer. He grunted, accepting the servitude without question. "Good. Make sure the bar is fully stocked. Senator Thorne drinks only single malt, 18 years or older." "Of course," I said, slipping the drive into my pocket. It burned against my hip like a hot coal. I had the numbers. I had the proof of the shell companies, the bribes, the inflated invoices. I had the rope to hang him, but I needed the executioner. I retreated to the library, the one room they had not yet invaded, and locked the door. I sat at my old desktop computer, initiating a VPN to mask my IP address. It was time to bait the trap. I opened a secure anonymous email account I had created days ago. I typed in the address for Jax Miller, the personal trainer, the lover, the biological father. Russo had provided his email along with the photos. Subject: "You are being played, Body Jax. You think Chantel is going to leave him? She is playing you. She is telling everyone at the party tomorrow that the baby is 100% sterling. She has signed a prenup that cuts you out completely. Once that kid is born, you will never see a dime. But here is the thing: Preston is sterile. The old man, Atticus, does not know. If you walk into that party tomorrow and claim your son, they will have to pay you off to keep it quiet. We are talking millions, not thousands. She is about to become the mother of the heir to a billion-dollar empire. Do you really want to be spotting bench presses for $20 an hour while she lives on a yacht with your son? The party is at 42 Ocean Drive, 7 o'clock in the evening. Dress nice. It is going to be a big night for fathers. A friend." I hit send. Jax was greedy. I saw it in his eyes in the photos Russo took. He was a small-time hustler who thought he deserved the big time. He would not be able to resist the idea that Chantel was cutting him out of a fortune. He would come. He would come to mark his territory. Next, I opened a new message. This one was for Silas Kavanaugh. Subject: The Fall of the House of Sterling. Body Mr. Kavanaugh. You have been trying to buy the Harbor Point project for 5 years. Atticus Sterling is leveraging it tomorrow night to cover a $12 million hole in his accounts. If you want to see him crumble, and if you want to know exactly who has been selling your corporate secrets to him, come to 42 Ocean Drive tomorrow at 7 o'clock. I have a seat reserved for you. Front row. I attached a single photo, a screenshot of the text message Chantel sent to him demanding payment. Just enough to let him know I knew. I sent the email. The cast was assembled. The villain, the rival, the lover, and the fool. I walked out of the library and nearly collided with Chantel. She was wearing a silk face mask, looking like a terrifying phantom. "There you are," she snapped. "I've been looking everywhere. Listen, tomorrow night, after the speeches, Atticus wants to give a tour of the house, to show off the historical architecture or whatever." "Okay," I said. "So, I need you to clean out that room upstairs, the dead kid's room," she said, waving a hand dismissively. "Get rid of the creepy dolls in the bed. We are going to stage it as a nursery. Put some balloons in there. Make it look like a happy place, not a mausoleum." My blood ran cold. She wanted to erase Lily completely. She wanted to parade strangers through my daughter's sanctuary and pretend it was for her bastard child. I dug my fingernails into my palms until I felt skin break. "I will take care of it," I said softly. "Good. And try to wear something that does not look like you are going to a funeral. It brings down the vibe." She turned on her heel and walked away. I stood there for a long time, listening to the silence of the house that was no longer mine. They had taken everything, my space, my peace, my dignity. Now they wanted to take my memories. I went to the kitchen where Beatrice was fussing over the seating chart. "Beatrice," I said. "Atticus mentioned a slideshow for the presentation." "Oh, yes." She looked up, flustered. "He wants to project photos of the family history behind him while he speaks, to show the lineage. From his father, to him, to Ethan and Preston, and then the ultrasound picture. It is on this USB drive." She handed me a gold-plated stick. "Can you load it onto the laptop connected to the projector? I am just so terrible with technology." "I would be happy to," I said, taking the drive. "I will make sure it is perfect." I took the drive to the living room. The large screen was already set up, dominating the space where Ethan's piano used to be. I plugged in the drive. I opened the file. It was a montage of sterling arrogance photos of Atticus shaking hands with presidents, photos of groundbreaking ceremonies, and heavily edited photos of Preston looking successful. I deleted it. Then, I opened the folder I had prepared. I uploaded a new presentation. It had the same file name, sterling_legacy_final ... But the content was very different ... I tested the clicker ... Slide 1, Atticus ... Slide 2, the ultrasound. Slide 3. I smiled. It worked. I shut down the system and left the clicker on the podium. That night, the house was finally quiet. The workers had left. Preston and Chantel were asleep, dreaming of money they did not earn. Atticus had gone to his hotel in the city to prepare his speech. I walked up the stairs, my bare feet silent on the carpet. I stopped in front of Lily's door. I pushed it open. The room was already half destroyed. The movers had packed up most of the toys. The curtains were gone, but the glow-in-the-dark stars were still on the ceiling. I walked to the center of the room and sat on the floor, right where her bed used to be. I closed my eyes and breathed in. Underneath the smell of cleaning chemicals, I could still smell its strawberries and sunshine. "I am sorry, baby," I whispered into the dark. "I am sorry I let them in here. I am sorry I let them touch your things." I touched the floorboards, tracing the scratches where she used to run her toy cars. "But it is okay," I said, my voice strengthening, "because tomorrow, they are going to pay. Tomorrow, everyone will know the truth. I am going to burn their lies to ash. Lily, and when the smoke clears, this house will be clean again." I sat there for an hour, gathering my strength. letting the ghost of my daughter hold me one last time. Then I stood up, I wiped my face, I walked out of the room and closed the door. I went to my bedroom and laid out my outfit for tomorrow, not the gray, mousy dress Beatrice had suggested. I pulled out a dress I had bought in Paris with Ethan. Years ago, it was black, floor length, with a sharp, architectural neckline. It was severe. It was elegant. It was a dress for a woman who gives orders, not one who takes them. I checked my phone one last time. Jax had replied, "I will be there." Kavanaugh had not replied, which meant he would definitely be there. The timer was set. The fuse was lit. I climbed into bed, but I did not sleep. I lay awake, watching the moon track across the sky, waiting for the sun to rise on the day of judgment. The sun had barely dipped below the horizon when my home ceased to be a home and transformed into a theater of the absurd. Atticus had demanded spectacle, and his money had bought it. The driveway, usually lined with the soft shadows of oak trees, was now a blinding runway of architectural floodlights, illuminating a parade of Bentleys, Rolls-Royces, and German sedans that cost more than most people would earn in 2 lifetimes. I stood at the top of the staircase, concealed by the shadows of the landing, watching the vultures arrive. They glided through the front door in a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns, their laughter echoing off the marble floors like broken glass. I recognized them all. There was Senator Thorne, shaking hands with the vigor of a man seeking re-election, his smile bright and empty. There was the CEO of Apex Strategics, my own boss, looking uncomfortable as he accepted a glass of champagne from a waiter. And there, standing near the grand piano that had been shoved into a corner to make room for the bar, was Silas Kavanaugh. He looked like a wolf in a wool suit, his eyes scanning the room not for friends, but for weaknesses. He had received my invitation. The air in the house was thick, perfumed with expensive lilies and the metallic tang of ambition. The string quartet in the corner played Vivaldi, the frantic tempo matching the beating of my heart. But my heart was not racing from fear. It was racing with the adrenaline of a hunter who has finally cornered the prey. I turned away from the banister and walked back into the master bedroom. On the bed lay the dress. Beatrice had sent over a gray chiffon gown earlier that afternoon, with a note saying it would look appropriate and modest. I had left it on the floor where the cat could sleep on it. Instead, I stepped into the dress I had chosen. It was a vintage piece Ethan and I had found in a small atelier in Paris years ago. It was black velvet, strapless, with a structure that defied gravity and a slit that ran dangerously high up the thigh. It was not a dress for a grieving widow. It was a dress for a coronation. I sat at the vanity and applied my lipstick. Deep, blood red. I swept my hair back into a severe, sleek bun, exposing the line of my neck and the diamond earrings that caught the light like shards of ice. "Showtime, Nadia," I whispered to the reflection. The woman staring back did not blink. I walked out of the room and began my descent. The noise of the party acted as a buffer, a wall of sound that I had to breach. As I reached the midpoint of the staircase, the conversation nearest to me died down. Then the silence spread, rippling outward like a wave, until the entire room turned to look up. Beatrice was the first to react. She was standing near the buffet, holding a plate of canapés. Her mouth opened slightly, her eyes widening in genuine shock. She had expected a broken woman in gray. She was looking at a queen in black. Atticus was holding court in the center of the room, a glass of scotch in one hand and a cigar in the other. Ignoring his own no-smoking rule, he turned slowly, his irritation at the silence evident. Until he saw me, his eyes narrowed. He did not like surprises, and my appearance was a deviation from his script. But he was a professional. He masked his annoyance with a tight, shark-like smile and raised his glass. "And here she is," Atticus boomed, his voice projecting to the back of the room without a microphone. "The lady of the house, my daughter-in-law, Nadia." The room erupted in polite, confused applause. I descended the final steps, moving with a slow, deliberate grace. The crowd parted for me. I could feel their eyes judging, assessing, wondering. I walked straight to Atticus. "You look dramatic," he murmured under his breath as I approached, his smile never wavering for the audience. "I thought we agreed on the gray." "I spilled coffee on it," I lied smoothly, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. "Besides, black is traditional for mourning. Is it not? I am mourning the loss of my home." Atticus chuckled darkly. "Save the wit for the condo. Nadia, just remember your lines." I turned my gaze to the corner of the room where the happy couple was holding court. Preston looked like he was wearing a suit made of sandpaper. He was sweating profusely, dabbing his forehead with a handkerchief every 30 seconds. His eyes were darting around the room, terrified, as if he expected the FBI to burst through the windows at any moment. Beside him, Chantel was in her element. She was wearing a white silk gown that clung to her fake pregnancy bump like a second skin. She was glowing, radiant with the triumph of a con artist who believes she has pulled off the heist of the century. She was holding court with the wives of the board members, laughing too loudly, her hand resting protectively and possessively on her stomach. I walked over to them. "Nadia," Chantel squealed, her voice grating. "Oh my God, that dress. It is so vintage, very bold choice for a family event." "You look beautiful." "Chantel," I said, my voice dripping with honey. "White suits you. It represents purity. Does it not?" Preston flinched. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. He knew something was wrong. He could smell the ozone in the air before the lightning strike, but he was too paralyzed to move. "Thanks," Chantel preened, oblivious. "Atticus says I look like a Madonna." "Indeed," I said. "A Madonna with secrets." I left them before she could process the comment and circulated through the room. I made eye contact with Silas Kavanaugh. He was leaning against a pillar, nursing a tonic water. He gave me the slightest nod, a microscopic inclination of his head. He was ready. He had seen the email. He was here to watch the blood sport. At 7:30, the lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the small stage that had been erected in front of the fireplace. Atticus stepped up to the podium, tapping the microphone. The feedback whined, silencing the crowd. "Friends, colleagues, family," Atticus began. His voice rich and baritone, the voice that had sold 1,000 condos and silenced 100 lawsuits. "Thank you for joining us tonight. We gather here not just to celebrate a merger of assets, but a merger of generations." The screen behind him lit up with the slide I had prepared, the one I had supposedly fixed. For now, it showed a harmless photo of the original Sterling headquarters from 1950. 70 years ago, Atticus continued, gesturing grandly, "my father laid the first brick of what would become Sterling Construction. He believed in one thing: legacy. A name is not just a word, it is a promise. It is a fortress that protects us from the chaos of the world." He paused for effect. The audience nodded, mesmerized. They were eating it up. "We have had our tragedies," Atticus said, his voice dipping to a practiced somber note. "My son Ethan, a visionary taken too soon, and his daughter, Lily, we miss them every day." I stood in the front row, my hands clasped in front of me, digging my nails into my palms to keep from laughing. The hypocrisy was physical. It felt like slime coating the walls. "But," Atticus's voice soared, "life finds a way. Tonight, we turn the page. We are here to welcome the future. My son, Preston, and his lovely wife, Chantel, are giving this family the greatest gift of all, a son, a new Sterling heir to carry the torch." Applause thundered. Chantel beamed, waving like a beauty queen. Preston tried to smile, but it looked more like a grimace of pain. "And to ensure this child has the foundation he deserves," Atticus announced, "we are formally bringing this historic property back into the family trust. It will be the cradle of the next generation, and here to facilitate that transition, with grace and dignity, is Nadia." He beckoned to me. "Nadia, come up here." The spotlight swung to me. The light was blinding, white and hot. I took a breath, letting the oxygen fill my lungs, fueling the fire inside. I stepped onto the stage. Atticus handed me a large, ceremonial brass key, a ridiculous prop he must have ordered specifically for this moment. "The floor is yours, my dear," he whispered. Stepping back but staying close enough to intervene if I strayed, I moved to the microphone. I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw Beatrice, anxious. I saw Preston, sweating. I saw Chantel, smug. I saw Kavanaugh, waiting. "Thank you, Atticus," I said, my voice steady, amplified through the speakers. It sounded different than I remembered, deeper, stronger. "And thank you all for coming to my home tonight." I paused, letting the word "my" hang in the air for a fraction of a second too long. "Atticus speaks often of legacy," I continued, making eye contact with the senator in the front row. "He speaks of truth. He speaks of blood. And he is right. Blood is a powerful thing. It carries our history. It carries our secrets. It carries things we cannot hide, no matter how much money we pay to bury them." Atticus shifted behind me. I could feel his tension radiating like heat. This was not the speech he had approved. "When I bought this house with my late husband, Ethan," I said, ignoring Atticus's step forward, "we wanted it to be a place of honesty. Ethan hated lies. He hated the way they rot a foundation from the inside out. He used to say that you can paint over mold, you can put up gold wallpaper and hang crystal chandeliers, but eventually, the structure collapses." "Nadia," Atticus warned, his voice low and dangerous, audible only to me. "Wrap it up." I smiled at him, a smile that did not reach my eyes. "I am just getting to the good part. Atticus." I turned back to the crowd. "Tonight, we are here to witness a transfer, but not just of property. We are here to witness the transfer of truth, because this house has seen enough lies. It has seen grief used as a weapon. It has seen family turned into collateral." The room was dead silent. The unease was palpable. Guests were exchanging nervous glances. This was not a toast. It was an indictment. "So," I said, gripping the podium, "before I hand over this key, before I surrender the sanctuary of my daughter to the future that Atticus has built, I think it is important that we all know exactly what that future is made of." I raised my hand, holding the clicker for the presentation, but before I could press the button, a commotion erupted at the back of the room. The heavy double doors of the main entrance slammed open with a violence that shook the walls. The sound of shouting cut through the tension like a knife. "Get your hands off me!" a voice roared. It was raw, guttural, and furious. Heads turned. The security guards Atticus had hired, 2 large men in black suits, were struggling to hold back a figure in the entryway. It was Jax. He looked nothing like the polished guests. He was wearing dark jeans and a tight black t-shirt that strained against his muscles. His hair was disheveled, his face flushed with rage. He looked like a bull that had just smashed through a fence. "I was invited," Jax screamed, shoving one of the guards into a display of flowers. The vase crashed to the floor, shattering loudly. "I have an email. Let me in." Atticus looked furious. He stormed to the edge of the stage. "What is the meaning of this? Get that hooligan out of here." "No," Jax bellowed, breaking free and stumbling into the main salon. He pointed a shaking finger toward the front of the room. "I am not leaving until I talk to her." Preston stood up, knocking his chair over. His face was the color of ash. Chantel froze. She was holding a glass of red wine, a 1982 Bordeaux, that Atticus had opened for the special toast. Her eyes were wide, fixed on Jax as if he were a ghost. "Jax," she whispered, the word barely audible, but in the silence of the room, it carried. "You think you can cut me out?" Jax shouted, marching through the crowd of stunned socialites who parted like the Red Sea. "You think you can take my son and play house with this rich loser?" "Security!" Atticus roared, his face turning purple. "Remove him." "Wait," I said into the microphone. My voice commanded the room. "Let him speak. He seems to have something important to say about the family legacy." Jack stopped 10 feet away from Chantel. He was breathing hard. his chest heaving. He ignored Atticus. He ignored me. He looked only at Chantel. "You told me it was done," Jack spat. "You told me we were waiting for the old man to die. But I got the email. Chantel, I know you are signing him over. I know you are selling my kid to them." "Jax, stop," Chantel hissed. Standing up, her hands were shaking so badly the wine in her glass rippled. "You are drunk. Get out." "I am not drunk," Jax yelled. "I am the father. That is my boy in there, and no sterile little rich boy is going to put his name on my son's birth certificate." The word hung in the air. Sterile. A collective gasp went through the room. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated scandal. Atticus froze. He looked at Jax. Then he looked at Preston. The confusion on his face began to curdle into horror. "What did you say?" Atticus asked, his voice barely a whisper. Chantel panicked. She took a step back, her heel catching on the hem of her long dress. She stumbled. Her arm flailed out to catch her balance. The glass of red wine flew from her hand. Time seemed to slow down. The crystal goblet spun through the air, glinting under the chandelier lights. It splashed its contents across the front of her pristine white silk dress before shattering on the floor. The dark red stain blossomed instantly across her stomach, looking for all the world like a gruesome, bloody wound. Chantel gasped. Looking down at the ruin of her dress, the symbolism was violent and impossible to ignore. The purity was gone. The lie was stained. I stood on the stage, looking down at the chaos. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply watched the first domino fall. "Oh dear," I said into the microphone, my voice cool and detached. "It seems we have a spill, but do not worry about the rug. Beatrice, I think we have much bigger stains to worry about." I looked at Atticus, who was staring at Preston with the eyes of a man watching his world disintegrate. "Shall we look at the slides now, Atticus?" I asked. "I think they might clear up the confusion." I pressed the button on the clicker. The screen behind me shifted. The picture of the Sterling building vanished. In its place, projected 10 feet tall for all of Boston's elite to see, was a medical document. The header read, "Zurich Institute of Urology." The patient name Preston Sterling. The diagnosis, irreversible sterility. The room went black with silence, followed instantly by the explosion of 100 whispers. The party was over. The execution had begun. The image on the screen was static, cold, and monochromatic, yet it burned with the intensity of 1,000 suns. The medical report from the Zurich Institute of Urology loomed over the ballroom, 10 feet high. Every pixel was a condemnation. The room did not just go quiet, it died. The silence was absolute, a vacuum that sucked the air out of the lungs of every socialite, politician, and business titan in the room. They were staring at the words, "irreversible sterility," next to the name Preston Sterling like it was a tombstone. I stood on the stage, gripping the podium, feeling the vibration of the shockwave I had just detonated. I did not give them time to recover. I leaned into the microphone. "For those of you in the back who cannot read the fine print," I said, my voice cutting through the stillness like a scalpel. "Let me summarize. This is a medical evaluation dated 14 years ago. It confirms that Preston Sterling suffered a severe case of mumps orchitis. The result was absolute. He cannot father children. He never could. He never will." I turned my head slowly, locking eyes with my husband's brother. He was still standing by his overturned chair, his face a mask of gray ash. "Preston," I said softly, but the speakers amplified it into a thunderclap. "Did you think biology was something you could bribe? Did you think you could just borrow a child and no one would do the math?" Preston opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at his father. Atticus was frozen, his face a rictus of confusion that was rapidly curdling into horror. He looked from the screen to his son, his brain trying to reconcile the lie he had bought with the truth that was staring him in the face. "Is this true?" Atticus whispered. The microphone on the podium picked it up. Preston flinched. Dad, Is it true? Atticus roared, the sound tearing from his throat, shattering his composure. I had to, Preston screamed back, his voice cracking, high and pathetic. You were going to cut me off. You said the inheritance was for the grandchildren. What was I supposed to do? The confession hung in the air, ugly and naked. So you bought one, I said. You found a woman with a convenient pregnancy and you drafted a contract, a business transaction, a fake heir for a fake empire. All eyes shifted to Chantel. She stood amidst the wreckage of the shattered wine glass, the red stain on her white dress looking more violent by the second. She was shaking, her hands clutching her stomach, her eyes darting around the room looking for an exit that did not exist, but the exit was blocked by the man she had used. Jax Miller stepped forward into the center of the room. He looked at the screen, then at Preston, and finally at Chantel. The realization hit him. He was not just the father. He was the pawn in a game worth millions of dollars, and he had been played for a fool. You lied to me, Jack shouted, pointing a thick finger at Chantel. You told me you were leaving him. You told me we were going to be a family. Jax, shut up, Chantel shrieked, her facade of elegance dissolving into panic. Not here. Please. No. Jax yelled, turning to the crowd. He looked wild, dangerous. That is my baby. That is my son inside her. She promised me half the money. She said if I kept my mouth shut until the birth. She would divorce this sterile loser, and we would take the sterling fortune. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath that sounded like a hiss. The scandal was no longer just medical. It was criminal. It was conspiracy to commit fraud. We have a deal, Jack screamed at Chantel. 50%. That was the deal. You idiot! Chantel lunged at him, slapping his chest, tears streaming down her face. You ruined everything, you stupid, muscle-bound idiot. The scene was chaotic, vulgar, and utterly perfect. The mask of the Sterling family had been ripped off, revealing the rotting flesh underneath. Atticus Sterling snapped. The humiliation was too much. The carefully constructed image of the benevolent patriarch, the titan of industry, was dissolving in real time. His face turned a deep, dangerous shade of purple. He looked up at me, standing above him on the stage, the architect of his destruction. You, Atticus snarled. You ungrateful, treacherous bitch. He moved. For a man of 65, he was fast. He charged toward the stage, his eyes filled with murderous intent. He was not coming to talk. He was coming to silence me. Turn that off, he shouted, reaching for the cables connected to the projector. Cut the feed. Someone get her off that stage. He scrambled up the steps, his hand reaching for the microphone stand to swing it like a weapon. That is enough, Atticus, I said calmly. Before he could take another step, a shadow detached itself from the side of the stage. It was the head of the security detail I had hired personally that morning, a man named Kane who stood 6 feet 4 inches tall and was built like a tank. Kane stepped in front of Atticus. He did not strike him. He simply placed one massive hand on Atticus's chest and shoved. Atticus flew backward. He stumbled down the 3 steps he had just climbed and landed hard on his backside on the marble floor. Do not touch my client, Kane rumbled, his voice low and menacing. Atticus scrambled to his feet, straightening his jacket, gasping for air. I will have you arrested. This is my house. I will have you all killed. Actually, I said, drawing the attention back to me. It is still my house. The transfer papers were never signed. Atticus, remember, we were saving that for the grand finale. I clicked the remote in my hand. And speaking of grand finales, I continued, we are not done yet. You see, ladies and gentlemen, the paternity fraud is just the tip of the iceberg. It is merely the desperate act of a dying dynasty. But why was Atticus so desperate for this baby? Why did he need to secure the trust today? Why did he need to use my home as collateral for a $12 million loan? I pressed the button. The medical records vanished. A new image appeared. This one was a spreadsheet, a complex, detailed web of bank transfers, offshore accounts, and shell companies. "Let me introduce you to the real business of sterling construction," I announced. I used a laser pointer to circle a column of numbers. "These are invoices for the Harbor Point project," I explained, my voice echoing in the stunned silence. "Materials, steel, concrete, glass. The total cost listed here is $40 million. But if you look at the second column, the actual supplier receipts I recovered from Atticus's private server, the real cost was only $15 million. I heard a sharp intake of breath from the front row. It was the CEO of Apex Strategics. He knew exactly what he was looking at. "Where did the other $25 million go?" I asked. I clicked the remote again. A new slide appeared. It showed wire transfers going to a company called Chimera Holdings in the Cayman Islands. "It went here," I said, "and from here, it was funneled back into the United States under the guise of consulting fees paid to politicians and zoning board members." I looked directly at Senator Thorne. He was pale, sweat beading on his forehead. He began to back away toward the door, his eyes wide with panic. "This is not just embezzlement," I declared, my voice rising. "This is money laundering. Atticus Sterling has been washing money for organized crime syndicates for a decade. He has been inflating construction costs to clean dirty cash, and he has been using his influence to buy silence." "Lies," Atticus screamed from the floor. "These are fabrications. She forged them." "The metadata does not lie." "Atticus," I retorted. "These files were downloaded from your laptop yesterday. The same laptop you left unlocked while you were bragging about your empire. The digital fingerprints are all there." I clicked to the next slide. It was a scanned letter, a threat. "And when his own son, my husband Ethan, discovered this," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. "Atticus threatened him. He told him that accidents happen. He told him that brakes fail." The room gasped again. This was the accusation of murder. "I cannot prove you tampered with his car." "Atticus," I said, looking down at him with cold, hard eyes. "But I can prove you stole from your investors. I can prove you bribed officials. I can prove you defrauded the banks." I pointed the laser dot right at his chest. The red light danced over his heart. "You are not just losing a grandson tonight. Atticus," I said, "you are not just losing your reputation. You are losing your freedom. You are going to die in a federal prison cell." The dam broke. The room erupted into chaos. It was a stampede of self-preservation. The partners from the investment firms were the first to move. They pulled out their phones, shouting orders to their legal teams. "Sell," one man yelled into his headset. "Dump the sterling stock, all of it now, before the market opens on Monday." "Get me the district attorney," another shouted. "I want immunity I did not know." Silas Kavanaugh, standing by the pillar, was smiling. He raised his glass of tonic water to me in a silent salute, then pulled out his phone. He was likely calling his acquisitions team to prepare a bid for the scraps of the Sterling Company. Senator Thorne had vanished, slipping out a side door before the press could spot him. Atticus stood in the center of the whirlwind, looking around wildly. His world was collapsing. The people who had worshipped him 5 minutes ago were now fleeing from him like he was radioactive. "Wait," Atticus shouted, grabbing the arm of a banker. "Limitless potential. It is a misunderstanding I can explain." The banker shook him off with disgust. "Get off me, Sterling. You are toxic." Atticus spun around, looking for an ally. He looked for Preston. Preston was sitting on the floor, his head in his hands, weeping openly. Chantel and Jax were screaming at each other, a vortex of blame and hatred. Then Atticus looked at Beatrice, his wife, the woman who had stood by him for 40 years, the woman who had looked the other way. Beatrice was standing by the buffet table. Her face was white as a sheet. Her eyes were rolled back in her head. One hand clutched her chest, crumpling the silk of her dress. "Atticus," she wheezed. Then her knees buckled. She went down like a stone statue toppling from its pedestal. She hit the floor with a sickening thud, knocking over a tower of champagne glasses. The crash of breaking crystal sounded like the final gavel strike of a judge. "Mother!" Preston screamed, scrambling toward her. "Beatrice!" Atticus yelled, running to her side. I stood on the stage, watching them. I did not move to help. I did not call out. I simply watched. The sterling legacy lay in a heap on the floor: a fainting woman, a sterile son, a fraudulent patriarch, and a pile of broken glass. I turned off the projector. The screen went black. I walked over to the podium and picked up the brass key Atticus had given me. I weighed it in my hand. It was heavy, useless, and fake, just like them. I tossed it onto the stage. It landed with a hollow clatter. "Get out of my house," I said into the microphone. "All of you, now." The chaos in the room was a living thing, a hydra of panic and denial that thrashed against the gilded walls of my home. Beatrice lay unconscious on the floor, surrounded by a ring of terrified socialites who were fanning her with cocktail napkins. Preston was weeping, a sound that was less human and more like a wounded animal. But Atticus stood amidst the wreckage of his reputation, his face flushed not with shame, but with the belligerent fury of a dictator facing a coup. He was shouting at a group of investors who were trying to retreat toward the exit. "It is a fabrication," Atticus roared, his voice cracking. "Do not walk away from me. This is a corporate takedown. She manipulated the files. I will sue her for defamation. I will sue all of you for breach of contract." He turned his venom toward me. I was still standing on the podium, looking down at him. I did not shout back. I did not need to. I reached under the lectern and pulled out a thick, leather-bound legal binder. It hit the wood of the podium with a heavy, authoritative thud that silenced his tirade. "Save your breath, Atticus," I said, my voice magnified by the speakers, cool and detached. "Defamation requires the statement to be false, and breach of contract requires a valid contract." I opened the binder. "You claimed earlier that you hold a mortgage on this property. You claimed that my husband, Ethan, signed a loan agreement 3 years ago borrowing $3 million against this deed. You used that claim to force me into this charade. You used that claim to leverage a $12 million bridge loan from Zurich Global Holdings." Atticus sneered, straightening his tie, trying to regain his composure. "The paperwork is ironclad. Nadia, Ethan signed it. I have the original." "I know you do," I said, "and that is exactly why you are finished." I gestured to the side of the room. A man in a tweed suit, who had been standing quietly near the kitchen entrance for the entire evening, stepped forward. He carried a briefcase and wore thick spectacles. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, "may I introduce Mr. Arthur Henderson. He is the senior forensic document examiner for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and a court-certified handwriting expert." Atticus froze. The color drained from his face, leaving it the color of old parchment. "Mr. Henderson," I asked, looking at the expert, "you have analyzed the signature on the mortgage deed provided by Mr. Sterling, and you have compared it with 20 known samples of Ethan Redford's signature from the same time period. What is your conclusion?" "Mr." Henderson walked to the center of the room. He did not look at the crowd. He looked at his notes. "It is a forgery," he stated, his voice dry and precise. "And a clumsy one. The pressure points on the ascenders are incorrect. Furthermore, the forger failed to account for a specific idiosyncrasy. Ethan Redford was left-handed, but he wrote with a hooked grip. The signature on the deed was written by a right-handed person attempting to mimic the slant. It is, beyond a shadow of a doubt, a fake." "That is an opinion," Atticus shouted, pointing a shaking finger at Henderson. "I will hire my own experts." "You can try," I said, "but you will have to do it from a holding cell," as if on cue. The night outside the bay windows exploded into a kaleidoscope of red and blue light. The wail of sirens, which had been a distant hum, suddenly became a deafening roar that surrounded the house. The heavy oak front doors burst open. This was not the chaotic entry of Jack's earlier. This was a surgical strike. 12 agents wearing windbreakers emblazoned with FBI and IRS criminal investigation divisions streamed into the room. They moved with the terrifying efficiency of a wolf pack. "Nobody move," the lead agent shouted, holding up a badge. "Federal agents, stay where you are." The room froze. The guests, people who controlled billions of dollars in assets, cowered like children. "Atticus Sterling," the lead agent barked, spotting the patriarch in the center of the room. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, bank fraud, money laundering, and racketeering." 2 agents moved in on him. Atticus stumbled back, knocking into a waiter. "No," Atticus screamed, his eyes darting around wildly. "This is a mistake. You cannot touch me. I am Atticus Sterling. I built this city." He looked at me, his eyes pleading, then hateful. "She did this. She planted the files. It is a setup." The agents grabbed his arms, twisting them behind his back. The click of handcuffs was audible even over the commotion. "I have rights," Atticus sputtered, spit flying from his lips. "It was not me. It was the accountant. It was Weiss. He went rogue. I had no idea about the offshore accounts. He was thrashing, desperate to find a scapegoat." His eyes landed on Preston, who was still kneeling by his unconscious mother. "It was him," Atticus shouted, jerking his head toward his son. "It was Preston. He has gambling debts. He needed the money. He forged the signature I was just trying to cover for him. I am a victim of my own generosity." The crowd watched in horrified fascination as a father threw his own son to the wolves to save his own skin. Preston looked up. His eyes were red and swollen. He looked at his father, the man he had spent his entire life trying to please, the man he had sold his soul to impress. "Dad," Preston whispered, "you are blaming me." "Tell them, Preston," Atticus yelled, struggling against the agents. "Tell them you did it. You take the fall. You have nothing to lose. I can fix this if I am on the outside." I stepped down from the podium. I held a small remote in my hand. "He is not going to take the fall for you, Atticus," I said, walking until I was standing just a few feet away from him. "And neither is the accountant, because the architect of this crime has always been you." I pointed the remote at the sound system. "There is one last thing," I said to the lead agent. "Before you take him away, I think you should hear this. This was recorded 6 months ago. By my husband." I pressed play. Ethan's voice filled the room, amplified and crystal clear. It was the voice of a ghost returning to point an accusing finger. "You cannot do this, Dad. This is federal prison. This is blood money." "You are a naive child," Atticus's voice boomed from the speakers, unmistakable in its arrogance. "This is how empires are built. I am going to the DA. I am done. If you walk out that door, you will lose everything. And accidents happen. Ethan, roads are slippery. Brakes fail." The recording ended. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. The accusation of murder hung in the air, thick and suffocating. The agents looked at each other. The lead agent tightened his grip on Atticus's arm. Atticus stopped struggling. He slumped, the fight draining out of him as the realization hit. He had not just been caught stealing. He had been caught threatening the life of his own son weeks before that son died in a suspicious accident. He was looking at life in prison, possibly death row. "No," Atticus whispered. "No, that was just talk. It was a metaphor." "Tell it to a jury," the agent said. While Atticus was being broken, the rest of the Sterling facade crumbled into violence. Preston stood up. The betrayal by his father had snapped the last thread of his sanity. He turned his eyes toward Chantel. She was trying to sneak away toward the kitchen, holding her stained dress. "You," Preston screamed. He lunged across the room, tackling her. It was a scene of pure grotesquerie. Preston, the sterile heir, pinning down the pregnant fraudster in a pile of broken glass and spilled wine. "You lied to me," Preston shrieked, shaking her. "You said the baby would fix everything. You said Dad would be happy. You ruined my life." "Get off me," Chantel screamed, clawing at his face. You ruined your own life. You impotent loser, you knew you signed the papers. Jax, the biological father, roared and threw himself into the fray. He grabbed Preston by the collar of his expensive tuxedo and hurled him backward into a table of appetizers. Shrimp cocktail and silver platters went flying. "Do not touch her," Jax yelled, standing over Chantel. "That is my meal ticket you are grabbing." Preston scrambled backward, crab walking away from Jax's fists. He looked pathetic. He looked like exactly what he was, a man who had never fought a real battle in his life. "She tricked me," Preston sobbed, looking around for sympathy that did not exist. "She told me she loved me." Chantel scrambled to her feet. Her face was smeared with mascara and sweat. She looked at the room full of people who were looking at her with absolute disgust. She looked at the FBI agents who were now moving to secure the brawlers. Then she looked at me. She ran toward me, her hands outstretched. "Nadia," she pleaded, her voice high and desperate. "Nadia, please. You have to help me. I am pregnant. You cannot let them take me. I just did what they told me. I needed the money. You understand. Right, us girls have to stick together." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had mocked my daughter's room, the woman who had thrown Lily's toys on the grass, the woman who had tried to erase my child's memory to make room for her lie. I felt absolutely nothing, no pity, no anger, just the cold indifference of a surgeon removing a tumor. "Do not touch me," I said. My voice was quiet, but it stopped her in her tracks. "And do not ever speak to me again." "But the baby," she whimpered. "That baby is your problem," I said, "and Jax's problem. It has nothing to do with this house, and it certainly has nothing to do with the name Sterling." 2 agents grabbed Chantel. 2 more hauled Preston off the floor. Jax was being cuffed against the wall. I turned away from them. I walked back up the stairs to the landing, giving myself the high ground. I looked down at the ballroom. It was a disaster zone. Food was splattered on the walls. Glass covered the floor. The elite of Boston were cowering in corners or giving statements to the police. Atticus was being dragged toward the door. He looked old. He looked small. "Wait," I called out. The agents paused. Atticus looked up at me. His eyes were filled with a venomous hatred. But beneath the hate, for the first time in the 10 years I had known him, there was fear. True, primal fear. "I have one last statement," I said. I looked at the crowd. I looked at the police. I looked at the wreckage of the dynasty. "This is private property," I stated clearly. "And the party is over. I want every single person who does not live here out of my house, right now, or I will have you all arrested for trespassing." I looked directly at Atticus. "Take out the trash," I said to the agents. Atticus made a sound, a choked, strangulated noise of impotent rage. He lunged toward the stairs, but the agents held him fast. They dragged him backward through the heavy double doors, his heels scraping lines into the marble he had claimed to own. Preston was led out next, weeping like a child. Chantel followed, still begging, still trying to spin a lie that no one believed. Beatrice was loaded onto a stretcher by paramedics who had arrived with the police. She was conscious now, weeping silently, staring at the ceiling, her world completely destroyed. Slowly, the guests began to file out. They did not look at me. They kept their heads down, stepping over the debris, fleeing the scene of the crime. Silas Kavanaugh was the last to leave. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs. He looked up at me and tipped an imaginary hat. He didn't say a word, but the message was clear. Well played. The door closed behind him. The police remained to process the scene, but the noise was gone. The screaming was gone. The lies were gone. I stood on the landing, my hand resting on the smooth wood of the banister. My dress was pristine. My hair was perfect. I looked down at the empty hall. It looked like a battlefield after the armies had retreated, but it was my battlefield, and I was the only one left standing. I took a deep breath. The air still smelled of expensive perfume and fear, but underneath it, I could smell the sea again. The war was over. The occupation was ended. I turned and walked toward my bedroom. I did not look back. There was nothing left downstairs but ghosts, and I had exorcised them all. The silence that followed the storm was absolute. It was not the empty, hollow silence of abandonment, but the heavy, settled silence of a battlefield after the cannons have finally ceased firing. The police cars had departed an hour ago, their flashing lights fading into the distance like dying embers. The guests had fled, scattering into the night to call their lawyers and their brokers, desperate to distance themselves from the radioactive crater that was now the sterling reputation. I stood in the center of the living room, my bare feet sinking into the plush carpet that was, miraculously, still white in most places. The air still held the faint, lingering notes of expensive perfume and the acrid tang of fear. But the underlying scent of the ocean was beginning to reclaim the space. Around me, a team of industrial cleaners, a crew I had hired immediately after the police left, moved with the efficiency of phantoms. They were not there to just clean. They were there to exorcise. I watched a young man in a blue uniform sweep up the shards of the crystal wine glass that Chantel had shattered. The red stain on the floor, the physical manifestation of her lie, was being scrubbed away by a woman with a steam cleaner. The noise of the machine was a low, rhythmic hiss, soothing in its monotony. Near the doorway, two burly men were carrying out boxes. These were not my boxes. They were cardboard coffins filled with Preston's video game consoles, his limited edition sneakers, and Chantel's ridiculous collection of designer throw pillows. "Where do you want these, Ms. Redford?" one of the men asked, pausing by the door. "The curb," I said, my voice calm and steady. "It is trash night. The sanitation department will pick them up in the morning." He nodded and carried the remnants of their short-lived occupation out into the dark. I watched them go. I felt no satisfaction, no thrill of vindication. I simply felt a profound sense of order being restored. The parasites had been excised. The host was healing. I turned away from the activity and walked toward the stairs. My legs felt heavy, not from exhaustion, but from the sudden release of the tension I had been carrying for weeks. Every step up the staircase felt like shedding a layer of armor I no longer needed. I reached the landing and turned left, toward the end of the hall, toward the door that had been the center of the conflict, Lily's room. The door was ajar. I pushed it open gently. The room was dark, illuminated only by the moonlight filtering through the bay window. The cleaners had not touched this room yet. I had forbidden it. This was my task. I stepped inside. The air was stale. The nursery staging that Chantel had ordered was half finished. A deflated bundle of gold and silver balloons bobbed listlessly in the corner. Tethered to a chair, they looked like shriveled grapes. I walked over to them and cut the strings with my fingernail. I gathered the latex skins and dropped them into the wastebasket. Then I looked at the bed. Chantel had stripped the sheets, preparing to replace them with something gender-neutral. The mattress was bare, and there, lying on the floor where it had been kicked aside, was the pink rabbit. It was ragged, its fur matted from years of love, its button eye hanging by a thread. It was the rabbit Lily had held when she took her first steps. It was the rabbit she had held when she took her last breath. I knelt down. My knees hit the hardwood floor, but I did not feel the pain. I reached out and picked up the rabbit. I dusted it off, my fingers trembling slightly as I smoothed the ears. I expected the tears to come. I waited for the crushing wave of grief that usually accompanied any interaction with her things, but it did not come. The well was dry. The sorrow was still there, woven into the fabric of my soul, but the sharp, jagged edges were gone. I had fought for her. I had stood in front of the world and protected her sanctuary from the people who viewed her existence as an inconvenience. I placed the rabbit gently in the center of the bed. "You are safe now, Bunny," I whispered. "The bad people are gone." I stood up and looked around the room. The glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling were faint, charging up for the night. They were still there. The walls were still lavender. The soul of the room remained intact. It was not a nursery for a lie, it was a memory. And memories, I realized, are not fragile things. They are made of iron. A vibration against my hip broke the moment. I pulled my phone from the pocket of my black velvet dress. The screen was lit up with notifications. It was a deluge of digital chaos. CNBC. Alert: Sterling construction empire collapses amidst fraud scandal. Bloomberg: Atticus Sterling denied bail. Federal prosecutors allege massive Ponzi scheme. The Boston Globe. The fall of the House of Sterling. Heir disinherited. CEO in handcuffs. I tapped on the stock market app. The ticker for Sterling Construction was a vertical red line, plummeting into the abyss. The stock had dropped 85% in after-hours trading. Trading had been halted by the SEC, pending investigation. I scrolled down. There was a photo of Atticus being shoved into the back of a federal cruiser, his face a mask of shock. There was a photo of Preston trying to hide his face with his jacket. There was nothing on Chantel yet, but her time would come. The fraud investigation would reach her eventually. I turned off the phone. I did not need to read the details. I had written the story myself. I walked out of the room, closing the door softly behind me. I went downstairs, past the cleaners who were finishing up the last of the wine stain. "We are all done here, ma'am," the foreman said, handing me an invoice. "The rug will need time to dry, but the stain is gone." "Thank you," I said. "You did excellent work." I signed the check and walked them to the door. I locked it behind them. The heavy bolt slid home with a satisfying thud. I was alone. I walked into the kitchen. I bypassed the expensive wine cellar Atticus had raided. I went to the pantry and pulled out a bottle I had bought myself at a small vineyard in Oregon. A simple Pinot Noir. I found a clean glass, not crystal, just glass, and poured a generous measure. I carried the wine out to the back terrace. The night air was crisp, biting with the chill of the Atlantic in late winter. The wind whipped at the hem of my dress and pulled strands of hair loose from my bun. But I did not feel cold. I felt a strange, radiating warmth deep in my chest. It was the warmth of survival. I walked to the stone railing and looked out at the ocean. The water was a restless, shifting mass of black ink, crashing against the rocks below. The sound was eternal, indifferent to the petty dramas of human beings. I leaned against the stone, the glass cool in my hand. I thought about Ethan. I thought about the recording of his voice that had finally set him free. For a year, I had carried the guilt of his death, wondering if he had been reckless, if he had been unhappy. Now I knew. He had been brave. He had stood up to a monster. He had died trying to do the right thing. And tonight, I had finished his work. "I hope you saw that," I said to the wind. "I hope you saw him fall." I took a sip of the wine. It tasted of dark cherries and earth. It tasted like life. I looked down at the garden. The grass where Atticus had ordered Lily's things to be thrown was empty now. The wind was rustling the hydrangeas. In the spring, I would plant new flowers there, maybe roses, maybe thorns. I realized then that I was not just a widow anymore. I was not just a mother who had lost a child. I was a survivor. I had walked through the fire, and I had not burned. I had been forged. The fear of being alone, the fear that Beatrice had tried to weaponize against me, was gone. Solitude was not a punishment. It was a luxury. It was the freedom to breathe without asking for permission. It was the freedom to remember without being told to move on. I looked at the house behind me. It stood tall and dark against the sky, its windows reflecting the stars. It was scarred. It had been invaded, but the foundation held. Atticus had been right about one thing: a house is a legacy. But he was wrong about what that meant. A legacy is not about bloodlines or surnames or trust funds. A legacy is about what you stand for. I raised my glass toward the eastern horizon. "To the truth," I whispered. I stood there for a long time, watching the sky. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, the darkness began to thin. The inky black turned to a deep, bruised purple, then to a soft, hesitant gray. The wind shifted. The birds began to sing, a tentative chorus greeting the morning. I watched the first sliver of the sun breach the horizon line. It was a burning, brilliant gold, spilling light across the water, turning the black waves into liquid fire. It touched the edge of the terrace. It touched my face. I closed my eyes and let the light wash over me, for the first time in a year. I did not dread the coming day. I did not wonder how I would survive the next 24 hours. I opened my eyes. I looked at the sunrise. I looked at the future. It was blank. It was empty. And it was beautiful. A small, genuine smile touched my lips. It was not the sharp smile of the predator I had been last night. It was the soft smile of a woman who has finally put down a heavy load. I turned my back on the ocean and looked at my home. It was time to go inside. It was time to sleep. And when I woke up, I would start painting over the gray walls, maybe yellow, maybe something bright. I drained the last drop of wine and set the glass on the railing. They wanted to turn this place into a nursery for lies. I turned it into a tomb for their greed. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If you enjoyed watching justice be served, please let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from today. I would love to connect with you and hear your thoughts on Nadia's revenge. Do not forget to subscribe to the Sunday Drama Stories channel, like this video, and support us further by pressing the hype button so this story can reach even more people.